Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, I'll be doing some FPL and Premier League predictions. We have 20 predictions in total. Earlier in pre-season, I actually tried to predict the exact Premier League table the way I thought it would end, and you guys really enjoyed that video. So today's another predictions video. Feel free to predict along with me. Drop your predictions down below in the comments, but without further ado, let's jump into it. In today's video, we're looking at 20 different predictions, some of them FPL focused, some more focused on football, some looking at players and managers, and others looking at teams in general. You can see the full list on your screen. As I said, please do predict alongside me. It makes it a lot more fun when I can discuss it with you in the comments, and you can sometimes disagree with a lot of my predictions. We're just going to go through one at a time, and I'll update the list on the graphic as we go through. The first three are around Golden Glove, Golden Boot, and I think it's called the Playmaker Award, which is the most assists. I've not tried to do anything particularly different with these predictions. If I think it's a very obvious player, I will say it. But I actually think that the Golden Glove might not be a particular popular one because I'm actually going to go with Ederson. I think that Ederson was potentially unlucky not to get more clean sheets last season. I will be completely honest, I don't overly rate Ederson. I wouldn't put him in the top 5 goalkeepers in the Premier League. Maybe he would squeeze into the top 10. I think he's excellent with the ball at his feet, but he is not an elite shot stopper. And we've seen that on various occasions, especially last season. I also think that they were quite unlucky. I'm looking at specific goals. The one that sticks in my mind is Enciso. When he scored, I think it was on the final day, or maybe it was in game week 37. City conceded quite a few wonder strikes. And yes, Ederson made a few mistakes too. But on 10 occasions, they only conceded 1 goal in the Premier League last season. And on those 10 occasions, they conceded less than 0.5 expected goals. What that essentially means is they were either very unlucky in a lot of the games or Ederson made a few mistakes. Combining that, I think this season, if they defend in a similar manner, which I genuinely do think they will, even with the departures that they've had, I think the signing of Guardiola and some of the other signings in and around that, I do think there'll be another strong season for Man City. And I'm backing Man City's defence to continue to be strong and Ederson to pick up the Golden Glove. Moving on to the Golden Boot, I'm going to go very, very quick with this. I've got Erling Haaland as the guy that I think will be top goal scorer in the Premier League. I think the only thing that will stop Haaland is either an injury to Haaland or potentially if Kane does stay in the Premier League, which I don't know at the time of me recording this, that could potentially lead to a little bit of competition because Kane did so well last season. I just think Haaland's going to continue to improve. He looks so good in that City side, and he played significantly more minutes than I thought he would last season. I thought he would either get injured or he'd have his minutes reduced to try and prevent injury. He played a lot of minutes. He got a lot of goals. I would expect it to be the same this year. Erling Haaland's got to be the favourite for the Golden Boot. Moving on to the Playmaker Award or the most assists, I think you've probably got like 5 options. I would say Trippier and Trent are always going to be good options because they create so much. I think Bruno Fernandes and KDB from the central positions are always really good for creating chances. And also Mohamed Salah, a very creative player every single season, but specifically in pre-season this year, he's got something like 6 or 7 assists. So I would say for me, I've probably narrowed it down just due to fitness, because I don't think KDB, you can confirm, will be fit enough to get the opportunity. Obviously, he gets assists every season, but he needs to be fit to get the most assists. So I'm going to rule out KDB. I think Trent is playing quite a deep role at points in pre-season, so maybe not as many assists for him. I feel like Trippier, we might see a little bit of regression. So I'm going to say it's between Bruno Fernandes and Salah. And I'm going to back my boy, as you can see by the shirt that I'm wearing, I'm going to back my boy Bruno Fernandes. Now, this isn't just a biased opinion. Last season in the Premier League, he created 119 chances, which is a ridiculous number, the most in the Premier League, more than all of the other players that I've mentioned. He also had this highest expected assist, and he had the highest attempted assist too. So by all accounts, he was the most creative player in the Premier League last season. And as I said, he's just on the pitch all the time. So even if he's not as creative as some of the other players, because of the amount of minutes he plays, he tends to accumulate quite a few chances to create. And I think with the addition of Højlund, hopefully with Manchester United attackers starting to gel more, the likes of Antony, Sancho, Rashford continuing to perform well, I would expect Fernandes to get more assists in the Premier League this season. So I'm backing my boy. He's so creative. Hopefully the Manchester United attackers can start to finish their chances. So the next 4 categories are FPL focused, and I'm trying to predict the top point scorers, not who I think will be the best player, purely on a points basis. Starting in goal, I'm not going to predict Ederson, despite me thinking he will keep the most clean sheets, because you need clean sheets and you need save points and you need bonus points too. So what you ideally need is a player from a team where the rest of the team don't tend to accumulate that many bonus points. They make a lot of saves and the team tend to get a reasonable amount of clean sheets too. So last season it was David Raya. He got the most points in FPL because Brentford kept quite a few clean sheets. Raya made a lot of saves, and outside of Tony, the rest of the team didn't accumulate that many bonus points. And I feel like the standout player for me is probably across the season, Emi Martinez. We saw in the 2021 season, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, he got something like 180, 190 points. We know he has it in his locker. We know he's an excellent keeper. I do think he'll make enough saves because Aston Villa do still concede chances, but I also feel like they will improve this season defensively. With the addition of Pau Torres, I feel like they will be much, much stronger at the back, and I feel like Unai Emery is getting a really, really good performance out of that Aston Villa team. So I feel like Martinez just has a combination of everything. And if you were to ask me, maybe outside of someone like an Onana, because I still think Manchester United will be really strong, and if Arsenal do sign David Raya or if they've got Ramsdale, I think they are decent shouts. But I feel like if I was to just have one keeper across the season and hoping that they would score the most points, I think it would be Emi Martinez at the moment. Moving on to the defenders, this one is a little bit more boring. I do have Trent in there, but this is fully dependent on where he ends up starting the season. We've seen him at points play more of a 6 role in pre-season. We've seen him play more of that traditional number 8 role when he comes in inverted, which we saw towards the back end of last season. It really does depend, because I think with the signing of McAllister, what we're actually seeing is Trent comes into a defensive midfield role, and it's actually McAllister basically occupying that number 8 role alongside Salah. And Trent is actually playing really deep. And I would argue that that is a worse position than a number 8. And a worse position than when he played his traditional right-back role. It's probably the most defensive we've seen Trent. So if he stays in that role, I do not expect Trent to be the top scorer. But I am predicting him to maybe be a little bit more attacking in the Premier League. I do think Trippier is a good shout too. I just expect a bit of a regression from Newcastle defensively. So I'm going to back Trent. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not him this season. I would just say keep an eye on Luke Shaw. I feel like he's improving season upon season. He looks really good under Ten Hag. And I do think he's more creative than potentially the stats let on last year. So I'm not predicting the top scoring midfielder to be Salah. There's a couple of reasons for that. The first is I think there are other midfielders that are improving season upon season. One of them that I'm going to explain in a minute. And also I just think that in pre-season so far, and I know it's not that much to go off, but I'm trying to predict what is going to happen this season. Salah has been quite deep and quite wide once again. And he's playing more of a creative role. As I said in the assist section, I think he's got 6 or 7 assists in pre-season, which is remarkable. But it's probably not going to lead to him getting 250 plus points if he's only relying on assists. Now, of course, he will score goals. He's on penalties too. He's got everything that Salah has always had. I just don't think he's quite got in his locker to push towards 250 points plus. And I think, like I said, there are other midfielders that are improving. And as a result, the midfielder that I've predicted to get the most points in the upcoming season is Bukayo Saka. A player that is improving every single season, is also, as is with Salah, likely to be on penalties. Of course, Havertz and Jorginho could take them, but we expect Saka to maintain penalties. He's on corners too. He's got decent data. He's got excellent form at home. If he can improve the way he performs away from home, because his away performances are not very good, if he can improve those, I think we have an excellent player. And we have a player that will push 250 points, in my opinion. So I'm going to back Saka. And also, I just love Saka as a player. I love his mentality. I love the way he plays. I'm a Manchester United fan. To say I love an Arsenal player probably shows you what sort of character they are. But I love Saka. I'm hoping he has a really good season. And I'm backing him to outscore Mohamed Salah. And just to finish up, the top scoring forward is Erling Haaland. I don't need to discuss him anymore. Yes, Harry Kane pushed him last season. I think he was only 9 points off. So again, if Kane does stay in the Prem, maybe we've got a bit of a competition on our hands. But I think outside of those two, I cannot see another forward getting anywhere near Erling Haaland. So for me, a little bit boring, but top goal scorer, top scoring forward is probably going to be the robot. So in the next 4 predictions, we have some potentially controversial ones, but I will explain all of them. We'll start with the biggest flop. I know I've got a silly emoji next to this. This is not to say, I want to caveat first, because I absolutely adore this player in real life. This is not to say that I think this player will have a bad season. It's not even to say that I don't think they'll score a lot of FPL points. I was just trying to think of who is a highly owned FPL asset at the start of the season that I could see being slightly underwhelming for some reasons. And it is going to be Mitoma. Now, that isn't to say I don't think he'll do well, especially over the opening 3 game weeks. The reason that I predict him to maybe be the biggest flop is, like I said, to be a flop, you have to be quite highly tutored by FPL managers. You can't just be someone that no one is picking anyway. And I just think there are so many attacking options in that Brighton line. I can try and name them. Buonanotte, João Pedro, Welbeck, Ferguson, March, Mitoma, and Ciso. I've probably forgotten one or two. I'm sure Pascal Gross can play an attacking role. They've basically got 8 or 9 attackers for what is essentially 4 spots. And to be honest, all of them are good. Sometimes you can say, yeah, well, this team has 9 players, but there are a clear set of favourites. I don't think that's the case with Brighton. I do think that Matoma is by far and away the most nailed attacker in that Brighton side, but they've also got European competitions to contend with this season. If they go quite far in them, if they go through in domestic competitions too, I do think we'll see more rotation. So whilst I love Matoma in real life, and I think he will have a strong season regardless of the rotation, I just think in FPL he might get reduced minutes. His data's never been the strongest. He struggled with conversion at the back end of last season. Out of all of the highly owned players going into game week 1, I'm predicting that he could struggle a little bit across the entire season, but maybe not in those opening game weeks. So Surprise Star is going to be a really surprising one, hence the title of the award. And I'm going to actually go for Mudryk. Now, the reason for that is from what I've seen in pre-season, and again, that's really all we have to go off when we're trying to make predictions, and obviously based on what we saw last season. I really like the role that he's playing for Pochettino. Do I believe that he's nailed? Probably not, but he probably is first choice at the moment. And he's just picking up some beautiful little pockets of space. And I feel like that's where Mudryk excels. He's so quick off the mark. He's got excellent dribbling. I feel like he's just picking up these little pockets. Every time I see a highlight reel, or I watch I think it was the first half of their game recently, he's just picking up these really, really nice spots on the pitch. So I just feel like at his price in FPL, if Chelsea have some double game weeks, or maybe they get a few injuries as well, and he looks nailed on, and I do think Chelsea will score goals this season, I can imagine the likes of Mudryk and Kunku and Jackson linking up really, really nicely. And I think at some point this season, we could all have Mudryk in our team just due to that really, really nice price point. I think this will be quite a controversial one, though. I would love to know down below who you think your surprise star would be. One person that I'll just put in there, because I think he will really do very well this season, is Diaby. I feel like he could be absolutely excellent. Maybe not a surprise star, because he's looked really, really good in pre-season, but I feel like alongside Pau Torres, that is another excellent signing that Aston Villa have made. Best newcomer, again, I probably could have put Diaby in here. I think there have been so many excellent signings in the Premier League. The likes of Declan Rice is probably actually the best signing, but I'm trying to think about players that are new to the Premier League that I think will hit the ground running. And I've gone for Christopher Nkunku for so many different reasons. Firstly, I back Pochettino to do very, very well at Chelsea. I like what I've seen from Nkunku in pre-season. I like his physicality. A lot of players come to the Premier League and they don't have the same physicality as Nkunku. He's strong, he's fast. In the past, he hasn't had too many injuries. I know he's actually suffered from one recently, but outside of that, he's not really a particularly injury-prone player. He's an excellent penalty taker. He's actually not bad at free kicks and corners too. I feel like he's got so many routes to points. I feel like he'll be very nailed, and I think we'll see a lot of goals and a lot of assists for Nkunku, assuming he can stay fit this season. I love the look of his data in the Bundesliga last season. We're looking at about a 0.75 non-penalty expected goal involvement. So by all accounts, Nkunku looks the real deal. I'm very, very jealous that Chelsea have him. I would have loved to see him at Manchester United. I think he will be the best newcomer to the Premier League this season. And then finally, for this little category, we've got one to watch. I had so many on this list that I could have gone for. I've actually gone for Destiny Udogie, I think is how you pronounce his name. Let me know down below if I've butchered that. I'm just going to call him Destiny for this section. So good. He looks absolutely, again, like I said with Nkunku, looks the real deal. Such an attacking fullback / wingback. Under Postecoglou, they play a back 4, so it will be more of a fullback. We know at Udinese, he played more like a left wingback role, so he is used to playing in a back 5 or a back 3. This will be a little bit of a change for him, but he's looked really good in pre-season. Yes, he has some competition with Reguilon, but I feel like at the moment, from what we've seen, Pedro Porro at right back, and then Destiny Udogie at left back, or potentially we could see a little bit more of a defensive right back play for Spurs so that Destiny can get forward. Regardless, he just looks like a really, really exciting player. So not necessarily one that I think will break the game this season, but as it says on the tin, one to watch this season, and I could see him being a very, very exciting fullback in the years to come in the Premier League. So for the next award category, we've got biggest price rise, and this is across the entire season. Who will have the biggest rise in price? We tend to see one player that goes up about 1 to 1.2 million. They tend to have the biggest price rise. I think last season, was it Kieran Trippier? Let me know if I'm wrong on that, but I think he went from 5 mil all the way up into like the mid 6s. So we can get some really big ones. So when you're trying to predict this, you need to think about who is a player that is underpriced to how they can potentially perform, is not owned by that many managers at the start of the season, but you could see owned by a lot of managers at the end. For example, I think Martinelli is underappreciated and he could rise in price a bit, but he's already up at 8. Can I see him getting up to like 9.5? Maybe not. So the player that I've selected is Eze. I still feel like he's not that underpriced, but he's at 6.5 million. And if Crystal Palace do click, and I'm going to discuss Palace a little bit later in this video. I think they are a team that could do very well this season. If they do start to click, Eze is going to be at the heart of that. As far as we're aware, he's on penalties. He's on some set pieces too. It's just the fact that Zaha has left. There might be an injury to Elise. There's a little bit up in the air at Palace at the moment. But if they can lock their team down and get into a bit of rhythm, I feel like Eze will be at the heart of it. And I can imagine that he's a player later on in the season where we'll all be jumping on him. And like I said, he's not that highly owned at the moment. So by game week 3 or 4, if he scored a couple of goals, he could already be up at sort of 6.7, 6.8 million. Outside of Eze, the other one that I was going to recommend is Gusto, the £4 million Chelsea defender. Because if Reece James gets injured at any point, there's a strong chance he comes into the starting 11 and he's only 4 million. And if Reece James is out for a long time, we could basically have a starting Chelsea wingback / fullback for £4 million. And if that is the case, I expect him to rise in price massively. But at the moment, I've gone for Eze. So for these next two awards, we've got the best and worst goal involvement minus expected goal involvement, which is basically the biggest overachiever, the player that overperforms their expected data the most, and the worst again, underachiever, the player that underperforms their expected data the most. What this tends to mean is someone that constantly overperforms their expected data tends to be a good finisher, and in a team that is playing with other good finishers. And then someone that tends to really underperform their expected goal involvement tends to be someone that is a poor finisher themselves, or the players around them aren't converting the chances that they create. So traditionally, some of the players that we've seen have been underperformers, the likes of Darwin, Gabriel Jesus, players that are frustrating to own in FPL. And the players that tend to overperform are the likes of Heung-min Son, De Bruyne, Erling Haaland, because they tend to have a really good conversion rate. So I'm actually predicting the player to be the biggest overperformer of their expected data this season as Callum Wilson. The reason for that is I think he's an exceptional, elite, world-class finisher. I'm not necessarily saying that I think he's the best striker in the world. I think there are parts of his game that he lacks and he struggles to stay fully fit. But if we are looking at a player that I consistently expect to finish their chances, also score the penalties that they get, because that means they will slightly overperform their expected goals for every penalty they score, Callum Wilson tends to be a player that does that. And I feel like he showed at points last season why he's such an exceptional striker. He will be rotated with Isak this season. I just fancy Wilson to have a really strong season for Newcastle, and I expect him to probably overperform his expected goals. If Heung-min Son can get back in form to what we've seen in the past, of course I want to put Sonny up there because he's one of the best finishers in world football. At the moment, I'm backing Wilson. And then for the biggest underperformer, unfortunately, I'm going to go with Gabriel Jesus. 4 of the last 6 seasons, Gabriel Jesus has underperformed his expected data by more than 4, which is pretty poor. I think at this stage, and I know some people don't like it when I say this, I think at this stage, you could just say Jesus is a poor finisher. When it's only 1 or 2 seasons, you can say maybe they got unlucky, maybe the keepers made some good saves, maybe it was their teammates. Jesus just consistently underperforms. And I feel like it's a combination of, 1, I don't think he's a great finisher, but 2, he just accumulates so many chances. Like, he creates so many chances every game for his teammates and for himself that it would do well to finish all of them. So I think the combination of those 2 things will mean that Jesus consistently underperforms. And I also think that the only one that would compete with Jesus is Darwin, and I'm backing Darwin to have a pretty good season. He may well still underperform his expected data, but I'm expecting him to have a much stronger season and finish more of the chances that he gets. So Wilson is the biggest overperformer, Jesus is the biggest underperformer. So we're now moving on to 2 manager predictions and then 2 team predictions, and then we will finish with young player of the season and player of the season. So do stick around for that. For manager of the season, there is always a chance that it's whoever wins the Prem. So if Pep Guardiola and Man City win the Prem again, which I expect them to do so, Pep Guardiola could win manager of the season. If Arteta pushes Pep to the end again, it could be Arteta. But the one that I'm going to go for is one that could have well won it last season, and that is Unai Emery. We've spoken about Aston Villa throughout. I genuinely think that he is an elite manager, one of the best in the world. And he just turned that Aston Villa side around. I mean, they weren't terrible before he came in, but he has turned them from what is probably a mid-table or lower mid-table side to a team that you would not be shocked if they finished in the top 4 at all. You wouldn't be surprised if they challenged for the top 6, top 4, and I should say top 5 now, I suppose, now with the new rules coming in. But I would say at the very least, you would expect them to get in the top half of that table, and they're in Europe this season as well. Unai Emery is an experienced manager that knows how to deal with that. I feel like in comparison to some of the other managers, he maybe has a little bit more experience in how to rotate his team. He's made some excellent signings this season as well. I am backing Unai Emery to be manager of the season. Would not be shocked to see Aston Villa in the top 5 or in the top 6 in the Premier League. First manager to be sacked. I went back and forth on this. I think it's between a few different managers, but I'm going to go for Lopetegui just because if you did watch my Premier League predictions video where I predicted the Premier League table, I did predict Wolves to go down. I just don't know how much quality they've still got in their team. It just feels a bit toxic at the club. We see this sometimes when a club is angry and frustrated with the way they're performing. It gets a little bit toxic. There seems to be no backing of the manager. I mean, Lopetegui is a top manager. He just doesn't seem to be backed in the transfer market. They've sold quite a few players, but they're not necessarily buying them. I feel like maybe out of frustration, we could see him either leave or be sacked. I wouldn't be surprised to see him the first manager leaving, though. I do think there's a chance that Marco Silva is the first leave for a similar reason. Just doesn't seem overly happy at Fulham. And I think that Heckingbottom as well could be another manager that does make way, depending on how Sheffield United perform at the start of the season. Moving on to 2 team-based predictions. The reason I'm not doing any more than this is, as I said, I've already predicted the exact Premier League table and discussed all of the teams in detail. But biggest flop, maybe outside of Wolves, but a lot of people are predicting them to go down. Biggest flop for me, I'm backing it to be Fulham. And this is probably a controversial one because they finished 10th in the Premier League last season. They had an excellent season. I feel like they were maybe slightly lucky. They had a really strong start, but when you look at the data, they were really, really poor defensively. Yes, they created a lot of chances. I think a majority of that was down to Andreas, but also Mitrovic, who is an exceptional striker. They have replaced him with Raul Jimenez. I don't think Jimenez is bad, but I don't think he's as good as Mitrovic. And I just think that, like I said, the data suggested that maybe 10th was slightly flattering of them, maybe 12th, 13th more likely. And if we do see a little bit of regression, if Marco Silva does leave at any point, I feel like we could see Fulham struggle. I don't necessarily think they'll be relegated, but if we saw Fulham 14th, 15th, that would be a flop for them because of based on last season and based on how they're expected to do this season as well. So Fulham potentially is the biggest flop for a team. And then biggest surprise for the team or surprise star team, I'm actually going for Crystal Palace. I do think, like I said, Aston Villa are probably going to be the team that are most likely to challenge like the traditional top 6, but I think a lot of people are predicting them to. A team that people don't seem to think will do very well is Crystal Palace. I know Zaha's leaving. I actually think that may better them as a team. Roy Hodgson did exceptionally well with Crystal Palace towards the back end of last season. I know the fixtures were great, but I like what I see with that Palace team. I feel like the bulk of their team is really, really strong. The likes of Eze, Mitchell, Anderson, Gahey, Sam Johnston. I feel like they've got quite a few young players that have already got Premier League experience, and I'm backing them to have a strong season. They were actually 6th or 7th for expected goals conceded last season as well. They're a really strong defence. If they can score goals, if the likes of Edouard and Eze can heat up and get goals to them early on, I feel like Palace could have a decent season and potentially finish like 9th or 10th in the Premier League, which in my opinion would be an exceptional season for them. So for Young Player of the Season and Player of the Season, I think we could conceivably see Erling Haaland win either of these, but I'm going to just go a little bit different here. And yes, I'll back him to get the most goals in the Prem, but maybe I won't back him to do it so convincingly that he wins every single award under the sun. And for Young Player of the Season, I'm actually going to go for a fellow Man City player, and I'm going to back Julian Alvarez to get Young Player of the Season. Obviously, he's actually older than Erling Haaland, which I think a lot of people forget, but he is still a young player, and he is still new to the Premier League as well. I genuinely think he is already a world-class striker, and I'm not using that term lightly. I think Alvarez is that good. I think he's one of the best strikers in world football. I think his movement is exceptional. His finishing is exceptional. He's got a mature head. I think in literally any other team in the world, I think he starts. It's just because of how good Haaland is. But I think that Pep Guardiola sees that as well. He's had a season under his belt. Traditionally, players actually struggle in their first season under Pep. I don't think Alvarez struggled at all. Every time he got an opportunity, he scored goals and got assists. And I think that Julian Alvarez could quite comfortably get close to, if not above, 20 Premier League goals this season and be one of the top scorers in the Prem despite playing limited minutes. So maybe I'm backing KDB to get an injury or Foden or Grealish, someone like that, and Alvarez to get regular minutes in the first team. And I think if he does that, he will take his chance regardless of where he's playing. I absolutely love him as a player, and I would love to see him have a big season. And then Player of the Season to finish the video. Please let me know who you think will get Player of the Season down below. Again, there is a chance it's someone like a Saka or a Bruno Fernandes or an Erling Haaland. But I'm actually going to back a non-attacking player here. And I'm going to go for Declan Rice in his first season at Arsenal to get Player of the Season. There's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, I rate Declan Rice ridiculously highly. I'm not someone that thinks he's overrated. I still think he's relatively underrated, believe it or not. I think he's the best in the world at what he does, which is that kind of, he can play in that defensive role, but he's also box to box at the same time. And if he is playing alongside Partey, I think he'll be given the license to roam. We'll see that in the Community Shield this weekend, I'm sure. I just think he's so good. He tends to stay fit as well. He's not very injury prone. I think he'll play pretty much every minute available for Arsenal. And if I'm expecting Arsenal to continue to challenge City for the title, which I think they will because of how good they looked last season, they've only improved their team this season. I really have to predict Declan Rice to be at the heart of that. So I'm going to go for Arsenal to finish second in the Prem, to challenge City all the way, and for Declan Rice to be player of the season in his first season at Arsenal. So guys, there you have it. Those are my 20 different Premier League and FPL predictions. If you do enjoy these videos, please let me know down below in the comments that you want to see more of them. Drop a like as well. The more you guys like and interact, the more likely I am to do these videos throughout the season. Maybe we'll readdress these predictions around Christmas time and see how off on them I am so far. And also, please do subscribe. We are on the road to 80,000 subscribers. I would love to hit 80,000 before Game Week 1 deadline on FPL. So if you've not yet subscribed and you've somehow watched this entire video, please do consider subscribing. If you'd like to get your team rated for free by the AI in the lead up to Game Week 1, there will be a link down below to get your team rated completely free. And Fantasy Football Hub are also offering 50% off if you use my link in the description. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.